Okay, in my last video, my recent video on money, I talked about this idea of what is lawful, meaning it has a foundation, it can be measured, versus what is not lawful, which then would mean it's lawless or it's baseless and it has no foundation. Many of these things are very obvious, but I'm going to go ahead and share something that's obvious and yet is mostly ignored. There are others because there are those before me who discovered these things or rediscovered these aspects or these things, and I came across it and now I will share it with you. And the idea would be, if you gain this understanding, then you could just pay it forward. And little by little by little, people will become more aware of the obvious, more aware of what is lawful and unlawful, and therefore baseless. So we're looking at the moon and we're thinking about what is really the purpose of the moon, not talking about gravity and things like that, but we're talking about for measurement and within human society. Already, everything is inverted, and that much of this reality right now and within society and institutions, everything is inverted. What's good is we're told it's bad. What's bad, we're told is good. Right is wrong. Wrong is right. That sort of thing. So we are told, or how it's civilly looked at within the administration of humanity, the new moon is the dark moon. And yet, this is sort of illogical, and I'm going to explain why. There's no way to measure the moonlight. If it's dark, then how can you measure it? And if you can't measure it, then how can you create a unit or a marking point to then continue to measure, to then record? So the opposite, or what's been the case for a long time and then was slowly squeezed off and eradicated by the 14, 15, 1600s, is that the month is based on the full moon. And this is when the moon is fully illuminated, and therefore, and it's very reasonable, and actually it becomes very obvious that then that's how you would measure the moonlight. Because when the moon is at its most full, or when it is most illuminated, that is when you could measure the moonlight. Because as the moon approaches that complete illumination, the day before and the day after, let's say it's not quite at its peak. So you would need experience and a degree of precision to know what is truly the full moon. And then sometimes you may not know until it begins to wane. And then you would know, okay, yes, yesterday was the full moon. Today it's a little bit less bright, it's a little bit less full. And this is why in ancient times, those who measured the moonlight, who tracked the months, they had to know what they were doing. They had to be experts at that job. So you can see, this is why in lawful timekeeping and the recordation of months, the full moonlight was measured. And so then each full moon was the new or the next month. Now, look at how we do it now. The full moon isn't until around September 24th or 25th. And yet that would be the next month. That would be the beginning of October. And another way that's kind of funny, and again, I've heard this expressed by others, it's obvious to some, but to many it isn't. October, octo is 8, and yet that's the 10th month. So even the calendar in its own wording begins to contradict itself. Like 9/11 is really 7/11, because September is actually 7. So you could say it's we don't want to denigrate on tragic events or downplay them, but instead of saying 9/11 9/11, to be a little bit more savvy, it would be 7/11 7/11. In the same way, sunlight is the measure of the day. So the moon measures the month, the sun measures the day. And what would be the optimal time to get the sunlight to measure? It would be noon. or approximately noon. So the day lawfully and with the most accuracy for measurement would begin at noon. So the day does not begin at midnight. The day begins basically at noon. Here's where the inversion begins to come into this aspect. If you want to be away from the light, if you're a cockroach, or you don't want to be in the allegorical light or the metaphorical light or the spiritual light, right? Light reveals, light exposes. So if you want to invert that, you would want people to be in darkness. Darkness can represent ignorance or apathy or indifference or cruelty. If light represents the truth and kindness and compassion and being good. So now we have it where it's been inverted, where our day begins in the middle of the night when it's dark, rather than have the day begin when the sun is at its highest point in the daytime at noon. And at the same time, we are then calling the new moon when it's in darkness, rather than look at the full moon when it is fully illuminated and then have that be the beginning of each month. So then what is the calendar? The predominant global calendar is the Gregorian calendar. Really, if we boil it down, it's nothing but it's just a civil calendar, which means it's for administrative use, which then also means it's to manage public affairs. Now we're starting to get a little bit more accuracy if we want to see it, because we're not talking about lawful timekeeping. We're not talking about lawful recordation of the month or the day and how anybody on the planet can measure the moonlight to then know the beginning of each month off of the full moon. But now we have this administrative civil calendar that just counts days. So it's basically a work schedule. Hey, when do I have to work? Oh, Monday. When do I get a day off? Oh, I get Wednesday off. Or I get the weekend off. It's the end of the week. Now it just becomes a civil administrative work schedule. Really, what's the difference if you boil it down a little bit more, where you work for General Motors in 1930 and they have, blue schedule, red schedule, yellow schedule. And you just walk in and you say, oh, I'm blue schedule. That means I work the swing shift. Oh, I'm red schedule. That means I get Wednesdays and Saturdays off. It's just a way to tell people, employees or citizens or slaves or peasants or plebes, this is when you have to do what you need to do. This is when you need to clock in. This is when you can clock out. We get a monthly bill. So it's even tied into some of the derivative of words that it was already known to be a moon cycle to have the recordation of the months. So just consider how arbitrary this method is, just to basically count days. Because September 12th in 2018, it's Wednesday. But in 2017, it was Tuesday. And in 2015, it was Saturday. So how can this be a lawful, foundational, baseful way of measuring when in 2015, the supposed September 12th was a Saturday? Last year it was a Tuesday, and this year it's a Wednesday. Now just think about it from a more lawful, macro viewpoint. So if you were born on September 12th, when were you really born? Were you born on Saturday? Were you born on Wednesday? Were you born on Tuesday? It changes. It's arbitrary. So it's really a birth date. You're celebrating your birth date, not your birthday. Because to the bees, to the trees, to the dolphins, to the bears, to the fish, they don't go off of this Gregorian calendar. They go off of the cycle of the earth, of which one of them is the moonlight and the cycles of the moon to measure the months. Now imagine if we started to use this, what are we missing? How many fishermen are out at sea trying to use sonar trying to track down fish and coming up empty because they don't understand that if they began to expand their viewpoint, they might see, oh, salmon come up to the surface, or tuna react a certain way, or come closer to the surface, or go into this kind of a current on the full moon, or around the time of the full moon, or 1 week after the full moon. Instead, if you go off of this arbitrary calendar, you would say, oh, it's October 1st, but it isn't October 1st. It's really October 5th or September 23rd, because the moon cycle is fixed. It's not shifting. Also, think about it from this point of view. If somebody was going to meet you, if a supposed God or deity said, meet me on this day, and you're going off at the Gregorian calendar, well, it's like this with the September 12th example. Are you going to show up at that meeting to meet your God on Saturday or Wednesday or Tuesday? If you're going off this Gregorian calendar, you're not going to know what day it really is. And this circles back now to all these conspiracy, truther, religious types who say, oh, the end of the world, the end of the world, the end of the world is September 23rd. The end of the world is March 15th. The end of the world is April 23rd. If they are using this Gregorian calendar, you can flush 90 to 99 to 100% of what they're saying. And why? How can they think that they are predicting some prophetic event going off of this arbitrary Gregorian calendar, where September 12th could be a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Saturday or any one of these arbitrary 7-day work weeks? Do you see what I'm trying to say? Okay, so how does this work for everyday life? You're screwed, right? If you work at Safeway, if you work at Target, if you work at Google, if you work at Boeing, if you work at some bookkeeping company down the street, they want you to come to work Monday, whatever. You've got to do it. But in your mind, you can know it's not September 12th. Or you can know that the full moon is the beginning of the month. So yes, civilly, or as a part of public life, or a part of this public administration under the Gregorian calendar, yes, you have to play the game. But in your mind, you can acknowledge that you have a greater understanding that goes beyond that. Oh, and last little blurb. What's this whole point of the papacy Gregorian calendar that was implemented back in the late 1500s? Basically, it was for papal subjects. Yes, over time and from a secular standpoint, it's been rolled out civilly to most countries globally. But the original intent was that it was for Roman subjects, subjects of Rome. So once again, to the truthers, to the conspiracy theorists, to the patriots, you must understand, yes, you may still need to go play the game at your job, but in your mind, you can understand that there's a legal and even lawful aspect where you are essentially a Roman subject. You are acknowledging you are a Roman subject if you go off of this Gregorian calendar. And yet go against that system, you're going to get crushed, because that Greco-Roman Babylonian system will crush you. But at least in your mind, you can acknowledge the truth. And you can see past this Monday through Friday, Saturday, Sunday Gregorian calendar that basically just counts the number of days. This is a little historical touch point. Lunatic, lunacy, luna. There's a etymological aspect where it meant moon sickness. And yes, think about how the Roman papacy was calling people lunatics or heretics, and then this is a moon sickness, and how this would also mean, yes, these are people back in the 12 and 13 and 14 and 1500s that wanted to keep measuring the month by using the moon, and then they get labeled lunatics because they don't want to conform to this Gregorian calendar or even the Julian calendar that preceded it. Hence, they are an enemy of Rome. They are a heretic that wants to think for themselves. They don't want to conform, and they must be crushed, and they must be put down. And so then you get the derogatory statement, lunatic. Okay, thank you very much for your time, and have a pleasant day.